Welcome back to the final UCL Fantasy video and podcast of the season, this time out of Matchday 17 with my team selection. With 5 free transfers, I'll be aiming to match the best squad that I talked about yesterday in that video with the wildcard and the limitless combined into one. And keep your eyes peeled for the deadline stream tomorrow on this Saturday, the 31st of May, around 2 hours before kickoff for the Champions League final. I'll be answering all your questions, covering team news, injury updates, the lineups, and much more, the best captaincy options, differentials, you name it, and some of that will be also discussed in this video in a little bit more detail as well. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also hit the notification bell so you never miss a single upload or live stream, both UCL Fantasy and FPL. That content will return in a couple of weeks to months time, and we could also see Club World Cup fantasy content on this channel, as it seems to be very popular demand according to you, the viewers. Thank you very much for building up this channel over the last couple of years by subscribing, liking, sharing, and all that good stuff. There are also multiple links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, UCL Fantasy League, and Spotify can also be found down there in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. It has been several weeks since Matchday 16, the second leg of the Champions League semi-finals, so I'll discuss my performance first before moving on to my transfer plans and the team selection. So I had Donnarumma in goal, and missing out on the likes of David Raya and Sommer, who both produced returns, with the Swiss international getting a Player of the Match award in a 4-3 victory over Barcelona, winning 7-6 on aggregate. And I sold David Raya to Donnarumma, but the Spaniard saved a penalty in Arsenal's 2-1 defeat to Paris Saint-Germain, so I missed out on some points there. I have been slightly unfortunate at times with the goalkeepers recently, but I was also getting a little bit more fortune and luck early in the competition. For example, when I went for Alisson against PSG and he got massive return in Paris. So it kind of balances out sometimes, not always in fantasy games. I think a lot of you will attest to that. But Donnarumma got 3 points. It's not terrible, but the fact that I sold David Raya, it seemed like an unnecessary transfer at the time. And of course, if I delayed it until now, it would have been slightly better in general. But I do have a goalkeeper for the Champions League final in Donnarumma. My backup, Wojciech Szczesny, actually just got 1 point, and he was pretty underwhelming in the end. But I still think that choice of goalkeepers was fine. But in the end, it was Sommer and Raya who really came up trumps in Matchday 16. Now, with my defensive line, there were 2 solid options here in Denzel Dumfries and Hakimi, but the other 2 were very disappointing. William Saliba blanked. He got 3 points, so he was able to get a ball recovery there, or ball recovery point. And Nuno Mendes only got 1 overall, so he was very poor in the second leg. But at the Emirates, he also got an 8-pointer, so he's also done fairly well. And of course, he scored against Aston Villa in the previous round. But it was Hakimi who scored, got Player of the Match in that victory against Arsenal, and he was by far the star of the show. And Denzel Dumfries was in Matchday 15 for the first leg of the semi-finals when he scored a brace and got an assist against Barcelona in that 3-3 draw. But he still was able to get something here, and an 8-pointer against Barcelona in a 4-3 win is still very solid, and he's one of the most enticing defenders in the game. I think if you are building a team for the Champions League final, you definitely want to include the likes of Hakimi, Nuno Mendes, and Denzel Dumfries. Now, with the midfield, I only started 3 midfielders in the end because of substitutions. I took out my lowest scoring players from the Tuesday, but Rafinha was my captain and I didn't switch, so he got 7 points as his base score, 14 overall, and Bukayo Saka missed an open goal against PSG, but before that, he did score against PSG, so in the end, it's still a fairly decent return, getting 6 points. He also got a 5 points against Real Madrid by scoring at the Bernabeu, and Dembele got an assist off the bench. He was actually a doubt to start that game because of injury, and it wasn't that serious. That's why he was able to recover in time, but he didn't start the game, but he was still able to outscore a lot of players in that midfield position. But to complete the starting 11, I had 3 forwards in Thuram, Lautaro Martinez, and Doué. 2 of them blanked. Marcus Thuram scored a very early goal in the first leg, but did nothing in the second. But Lautaro Martinez was able to actually put Inter Milan 2-0 up at the time, and that was a common theme throughout both semi-finals against Barcelona, where Inter Milan had that commanding lead. Then Barcelona made a comeback, but Inter Milan were able to snatch victory at the very end in extra time through Fatesi. And speaking of which, him, Lautaro Martinez and Pavard were doubts in the last week or so, and they missed out in the final Serie A game of the season as Inter Milan narrowly missed out on that title to Napoli. But all 3 players are available, and Inter Milan have a full squad in group training, which I'll talk about later in the team news section. But in terms of my substitutions or those on my bench, I had Szczesny, Yamal, DeMarco, and Ferran Torres. All of them blanked, and a few of them did well in the first leg, but not so much in the second. I think going for DeMarco over Bastoni was a slight mistake of mine. I'd rather have the centre-back in my opinion, and the main reason why is because DeMarco's minutes are far from secure. He only got 55 minutes against Barcelona in matchday 16, so he can be subbed off before 60 minutes, and that's far from ideal, especially for a defender. Now, what does that mean for my rank and the points and all that good stuff? I got a green arrow to 25k, so it is progress. It's still a pretty poor season compared to recent campaigns, especially last season when I got to the top 800, but it's still a solid rank overall, and it's all about ending the season strongly, leaving, this campaign in style, and that's what I'm going to aim to do for the Champions League final. A lot of us will have similar teams since we only have 2 clubs to choose from, so going for differentials will be crucial, and there will be some 50-50 calls, and going for one player over the other in the midfield, or perhaps starting an extra defender, your choice of formation, all of that will be very important for matchday 17, and you can't make substitutions or change the captaincy, which I discussed in my best team video. That's always the case for the Champions League final, so you only need a starting 11. With 5 free transfers, I think it's very easy to build a solid squad for matchday 17, but you might have others with a slight advantage because they are in a very strong position to even get to a full 50-man squad and have more choices to choose from, and they've got a little bit more versatility and options at their disposal. But let's discuss my transfer plans for the final, and one of them could include another goalkeeper move. I'm going for Jan Sommer over Wojciech Szczesny, but I'd only make this transfer if I was convinced I would start Jan Sommer. Otherwise, it's not really important. I could just go for Donnarumma and then focus my efforts in the outfield positions. But at this moment in time, I am inclined to go for Jan Sommer, who has accumulated significantly more points compared to Donnarumma, and he has made more saves despite playing in fewer matches. Of course, Paris Saint-Germain took part in the knockout playoff rounds after a very poor league phase campaign, but they ended up making up for it in the knockout stages, and they find themselves in the Champions League final. But another transfer I'm looking to make is in the defender position, selling William Saliba, my only eliminated defender, to Willian Baccio, who is very good for ball recoveries. He has made 113 for the season, the most of any player, and the closest is Marquinhos with 106. Then there's a huge gap between those two and third place Hakimi. So I think it's definitely worth going for those ball recoveries in a Champions League final, which could be low scoring and cagey. If you are anticipating a very similar scenario with a 0-0, 1-0, it goes all the distance to extra time and penalties, and there aren't that many goals in it. Ball recoverers like William Baccio are going to be very important, and he can easily deliver 4 to 5 points even without the clean sheet. And of course, if you combine both of them, you could be looking at an 8 or 9 pointer, which we have seen from the Ecuadorian on several occasions. But the most appealing transfers will be in the midfield. I think this is the position where you can make the biggest gains, and selling Yamal to Çalhanoğlu is definitely on radar for me. My favourite Inter Milan midfielder is the Turkish international, who is on penalties, and he has a great record from the penalty spot. He scored against Barcelona and Arsenal in this Champions League campaign, and I think he's a very good option just because of those penalties. But then you combine the odd ball recovery point, the goals from distance, the assists from set pieces and open play. So Çalhanoğlu might not be the best UCL fantasy option you'll ever see in the midfield, but I think from Inter Milan, he is the most enticing. The other options from Inter Milan include Barella and Mkhitaryan. They can deliver in a one-off game, but Çalhanoğlu has a better chance on paper, and the penalties are a key reason why. But let's look at other midfielder transfers I could make, and Vitinha in for Ferran Torres is one of them. I could sell Saka instead and have 11 million in the bank or around that sort of mark, but it doesn't really matter. No matter what you do, you're going to have a lot of money in the bank, so whether you sell Saka or Ferran Torres is kind of irrelevant at this point, but I think one of them will be sold, and it's just a question of who do I buy. That's the most important thing, and it's not just Vitinha I'm looking at from Paris Saint-Germain, but also Fabian Ruiz, who has 1% ownership, not to mention João Neves, who is the best ball recoverer in the midfield with over 80 for the season, and he was very impressive across both legs against Arsenal. So one of those three midfielders will come in, I think, to replace Ferran Torres or Bukayo Saka, and Vitinha won player of the match at the Emirates in the first leg, and of course it was João Neves who got ball recoveries across both matches, and Fabian Ruiz, with that 1% ownership, he scored a brilliant goal in Paris. But another PSG midfielder we're all going to look to go towards, if we don't have him already, is Kvaratskhelia, playing on the left wing, but he didn't play a single minute in the Coupe de France final, where PSG won 3-0. Doué got 2 assists, Barcola scored a brace and also got an assist, and Hakimi, as usual, also got on the score sheet. So they were all very impressive. Nuno Mendes got around 60 minutes in that particular occasion. Dembele had a good game, but no goals or assists to show for it. But Kvaratskhelia being on the bench is quite surprising. I still think he'll start in the Champions League final, and either way, I'll cover both lineups for PSG and Inter Milan during that deadline stream tomorrow. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You have all the information you need, and you can make the best decisions in UCL Fantasy with the captaincy and your transfers. But that concludes this section. It's time to talk about my provisional team selection, and I'll discuss other potential moves towards the end of this video with some differentials also highlighted on screen. But Jan Sommer will be my goalkeeper if I buy him in. I'm not that against starting Donnarumma and just avoiding this transfer in general and focusing on the outfield positions, because maybe I can buy another differential on top of those players I just discussed and get Fabian Ruiz in the midfield, for example, or buy Bastoni in that defensive line, especially if I'm going for that sort of 1-0 Inter Milan win. And of course, both teams have been in the Champions League final over the last 5 years, and both of them have ended up missing out narrowly, but one of them will end up being the champion this time round. And Jan Sommer, I think, is a better goalkeeper in isolation compared to Donnarumma, but I think PSG will be a little bit higher in terms of the odds, which I'll also show you towards the end of this video. Now, going into my defensive line, I am looking to go for a back four, maybe even a back five. If I remember correctly, for last season in that Champions League final between Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund, I went for a back five and tripled up on the Real Madrid defense, and that was an incredible stroke of luck, you could say, but also ended up paying dividends with the UCL fantasy points. I also had Carvajal, who won player of the match and scored on that particular occasion. But I've got the likes of Hakimi, Pacho, Nuno Mendes, and Denzel Dumfries. I'm also open to the idea of buying Bastoni and going for a back five. That'll mean tripling up on PSG and Inter Milan defensively, and I am backing a sort of low-scoring final, maybe a 1-0 either side, so that would play perfectly into that sort of formation. But at the moment, I'm going for the back four, which is still more than usual. I typically go for a back three in UCL Fantasy and FPL, but I think this is very solid, and I recommend it to most people, going for this sort of back four or back five and having the wing backs like Dumfries, Hakimi and Nuno Mendes, who can get goals and assists, and then ball recoverers like William Bacho. Now, in the midfield, this position is the most likely to change before the deadline, but at the moment, I'm going for Dembele, Kvaratskhelia, Vitinha and Çalhanoğlu. The closest to making it into my final team is Fabian Ruiz, with that low ownership and the ability to score in big moments. And there's also João Neves for the ball recoveries. I look at the other Inter Milan midfielders and they are quality players, especially Barella, but I don't really back them in UCL Fantasy as much as the other options you see on screen, and those two I just mentioned in Fabian Ruiz and João Neves. Now, to complete the starting 11, I'm currently opting for Lautaro Martinez and Thuram, and that would mean benching Doué, but I'm also open to starting him over Vitinha. But no matter what I do, I'll likely go for a back four or a back five, and I'm also open to trimming it down to just one forward, but that is very risky because you'd be benching possibly two forwards who have a very good chance of scoring in terms of the odds. They'd be right up there in terms of scoring for the Champions League final with the probabilities, which I'll also showcase very soon. But on my bench, before I talk about my captaincy, I've got the likes of Donnarumma, Doué, DeMarco, and Bukayo Saka, who is eliminated, but I've got plenty to choose from. I can easily get to a 14-man squad, and basically, whether I buy Sommer or not, it's going to be the same case. I can only get to 14 players, not 15, but that isn't really too important. It's all about the starting 11. That is the most important thing here, with no substitutions being made and only one captain. You've only got one shot at it, and you've got to get it spot on here, and it gives you a great chance of getting a green arrow and ending this season as strongly as possible. But at the moment, I'm going for Dembele, who is a template pick, I think, for the captaincy. And PSG are probably favoured a little bit more than Inter Milan from what I've seen. This is also based off the odds for clean sheets and chance of winning the Champions League final. So Dembele is my favourite PSG option for the captaincy, but I think Hakimi and Nuno Mendes shouldn't be discredited. And from Inter Milan, Çalhanoğlu and Lautaro Martinez would be the standouts, and of course Denzel Dumfries in that defensive line if you're backing an Inter Milan clean sheet. Those are my favourite captaincy options from both squads, but it could be someone completely surprising like Fabian Ruiz with 1% ownership, or perhaps someone who's on my bench like Doué, who makes a difference in this Champions League final. But the most likely, of course, I've just highlighted from both Inter Milan and Paris Saint-Germain. And be sure to check out my best team for Matchday 17, combining the wildcard and the limitless. As we all know, we are now down to just 2 teams in the Champions League, and PSG are top of the clean sheet odds with a 32% probability, and Inter Milan only have a 25% chance despite them boasting a very solid defence. And I'll also compare both of their stats in the Champions League very soon. Inter Milan have lost fewer games, and of course they have also played in fewer matches as well, but their clean sheet record and also the goals conceded has been very impressive up until the semi-finals, where they conceded 6 goals across both legs against Barcelona. And PSG have kind of improved as the competition has gone on. They started off very poorly, they had some tough opponents in the league phase, but they've definitely picked it up with a few losses in the knockout stages, but they were still able to win over both legs against Aston Villa and Liverpool on those 2 occasions. But let's also talk about the goal scorer odds, and there are some surprising picks in here, you could say, but of course with only 2 teams you're going to get some kind of left field picks here, and this is all based on the probability or the assumption that these players will start. So Dembele is top with a 36% chance of scoring. You've got Gonzalo Ramos in second, but most likely he'll be on the bench. We've also got Lautaro Martinez, Barcola and Kvaratskhelia. That is the top 5 there for the goal scorer odds. But you've also got Thuram, Doué, Taremi, Kang-in Lee, also Fratesi, Vitinha, Kalanoglu, Zielinski, Hakimi and Mkhitaryan. And you've also got several other players who are tied with Mkhitaryan at 11%. That includes Denzel Dumfries and a few other options here and there. But ultimately, those in the top 5 is what you'd really want to hone in on. And Lautaro Martinez is my favourite from Inter Milan. He's got the best chance of scoring in this Champions League final. But Thuram isn't too far behind in my opinion. And of course with PSG, Dembele is the standout. But you've also got a few decent alternatives like Barcola, who scored a brace in the Coupe de France final. But let's now move on to the team news, stats and also the fixtures, breaking down the Champions League runs to the final from Inter Milan and Paris Saint-Germain. If we also take a look at previous Champions League finals, you'll see that a lot of the recent ones have been very low scoring. So we got a 2-0 win for Real Madrid last time out against Borussia Dortmund, then a 1-0 win for Man City over Inter Milan, this year's Champions League finalists. Also Real Madrid 1, Liverpool 0, Chelsea 1, Man City 0, Bayern Munich 1, Paris Saint-Germain 0, Liverpool 2, Tottenham 0, and that game was 1-0 throughout most of the game really, despite an early penalty from Mohamed Salah. But then you look at the other ones, which were higher scoring, like Real Madrid 3, Liverpool 1, also Real Madrid 4, Juventus 1, Real Madrid 1, Atletico Madrid 1, and of course Los Merengues 1 on penalties, Barcelona 3, Juventus 1, and Real Madrid 4, Atletico Madrid 1, and of course all those goals were scored in extra time. It was 1-0 Atletico throughout most of that game as well. But a lot of the recent ones, as you can see, have been pretty much 1-0, and you've got a few exceptions there, like a 2-0 win for Real Madrid or for Liverpool over the last 6 years. But I'm kind of backing a similar scoreline, 1 or 2-0, and football is full of surprises, and maybe this time out we get a high scoring thriller like we did in the semi-finals for Inter Milan versus Barcelona. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What are your predictions for the game? Who is going to win it? And which players are you backing to score? Who are you captaining in UCL Fantasy? And which differentials could be the game changers? But let's now dissect both Champions League finalists in Inter Milan and PSG with their route to the final and also analysing their results. Donnarumma or Sommer is a key topic this week, and my preference is Jan Sommer in isolation. But if you are backing PSG to win or keep a clean sheet, then keeping Donnarumma and just starting him and avoiding that summer transfer could also be a viable option. But I do have a preference there in terms of the shot stopping. Now PSG had 4 wins, 1 draw and 3 losses in the league phase with 14 goals scored and 9 conceded. They finished 15th in the league phase table, but in the knockout stages, they beat Brest 3-0 in the knockout playoff rounds. They also beat them 7-0 in the second leg, then lost 1-0 to Liverpool and then beat them at Anfield by the same scoreline, winning on penalties in the end, beating Aston Villa 3-1, then having a scare at Villa Park, losing 3-2, but they still got through, and they beat Arsenal both times to get revenge for the league phase, winning 1-0 at the Emirates and then 2-1 in the Parc des Princes. So overall, they've been very solid, and across the last 40 games, across all competitions, they have won 31 of them with 5 draws and 4 losses. So since their loss against Bayern Munich in late November, they have really turned on the screws, and they've been a fantastic team for the vast majority of those matches. Now looking at the other side with Inter Milan, they've been fairly more consistent in my opinion, with 6 wins, 1 draw and 1 loss, 11 goals scored and 1 conceded in the league phase, finishing 4th in that table. And in the knockouts, they beat Feyenoord 2-0 in matchday 11. That was their last clean sheet, which seems very surprising for a team as resolute defensively as Inter Milan usually are. They then beat Feyenoord 2-1. They also got the same scoreline against Bayern Munich away from home, and they drew 2-2 to round things off. And against Barcelona, 3-3 away from home, and then they beat them 4-3 in extra time in matchday 16. So they have really been very adaptable. So when they needed to, they scored a lot of goals and created chances. And in the earlier rounds of this competition, they were very solid defensively. We could see them going back to that sort of formation and structure for this Champions League final. I think it will be KG personally, but maybe you have a different opinion on that matter. But let's now move on to the team news. And as mentioned before, Inter Milan will have everybody available. There are no suspensions for PSG or Inter Milan, and the likes of Fratesi, Pavard and Lautaro Martinez, who were missing in recent days and weeks, they are in training. So that means Inter Milan have a fully fit squad for this Champions League final, and that's all that needs to be reported with the team news. Now, these are the stats for PSG and Inter in the Champions League, kind of directly compared here. So 33 goals scored for PSG and 26 for Inter Milan. And there are other stats as well to really hone in on. So 15 goals conceded for PSG, and for Inter Milan it's 11. And the Italian side have 8 clean sheets to PSG's 6. And other things that we should probably mention is the fact that PSG have suffered 3 defeats out of the last 10 matches across all competitions, just like Inter Milan as well. And in terms of Inter Milan, their recent result was a 2-0 away win against Como on the final day, but Napoli beat them to the title by a single point, so that would have been very frustrating as well. But in terms of possible lineups, we might get a bit of a leak from Sky Sports Italia hours before the deadline, but ultimately both of them will be covered with the official lineups during the deadline stream tomorrow, and we can base our decisions and our final transfers and captaincy picks, differentials based on that information. That's something I always recommend to people. Don't leave your transfers until the last few minutes if you can. That's something I like to do for some reason, but you definitely want to avoid making transfers too early because you might buy a player who ends up being benched. But you can see all the stats, all the team news that you need for Matchday 17. It has been covered in this video and podcast. Be sure to drop a like and all that good stuff. But let me now show you a few other players I'm looking at to buy for the Champions League final. One possibility is a substitute like Arnautovic, Gonzalo Ramos or Taremi, making an impact off the bench, scoring the winning goal, and that could definitely be worth a transfer for those with Lewandowski or an eliminated player in that forward line. But I'm quite happy to keep Lautaro Martinez, Thuram and Doué. I think they are high quality players. They'll get more minutes and their chances of getting UCL fantasy points is also significantly higher than those alternatives in the forward line. But Barcola in the midfield is certainly worth consideration, and I might end up buying him, especially if he starts. But otherwise, Fabian Ruiz is very enticing to me with that 1% ownership at the time of this recording. And in my defensive line, Bastoni coming in instead of Baccio is another consideration. In an ideal world, I would buy Bastoni and Baccio and then start a back 5. And that's something I could still do by avoiding Jan Sommer in goal and just starting Donnarumma as my main goalkeeper. So there are a few things to tweak and modify and finalize by that deadline stream. So stay tuned tomorrow and I'll be covering everything you need to know, and you'll have just all the information you need so you can be well prepared for the Champions League final, get a green arrow, win your mini league and enjoy Matchday 17. That concludes the final UCL Fantasy Team Selection video of the season, this time at a Matchday 17 with 5 free transfers. I discussed possible ways of matching those on the wildcard or limitless. It's all about the starting 11. You can't make substitutions or change the captaincy, so Matchday 17 is basically its own entity. It always has been that way with a Champions League final. You can still join my UCL Fantasy League. The code is cCaFxb. You can see it on screen and there's an auto-join link in the description. But thank you very much for watching this video and listen to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also hit the notification bell so you never miss a single uploaded live stream, both UCL Fantasy and FPL. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, further access to my videos, amongst many other perks, the Discord server, UCL Fantasy League and Spotify can also be found in the description. Thank you very much for all your support throughout the season. It's greatly appreciated. I'll see you tomorrow for that final deadline stream, and there could be Club World Cup fantasy content throughout the summer.